Welcome to this video on persuasion canvassing. Canvassing is really important. Evidence shows it's the single most effective voter tool to win elections. Having a real, live, sympathetic, genuine person knock on the door and talk to voters gets out the vote. It's a major advantage that Democrats have. There are so many people like you willing to go into their neighborhood and talk to voters and make that connection. In this video, we're not going to talk about mechanisms like walk lists. We're not going to tell you what to wear. We're going to focus on specific conversation techniques that we think are effective. Whether it's shifting an independent voter towards your candidate or getting an already sympathetic voter to get to the polls and vote. Remember though, there's not one way to canvass. You can learn these techniques and adapt them to your own personality, to the situation, and to the voter that you're talking to. And don't worry if you don't remember all the techniques we're teaching in this video or apply them all at once. As you canvass more and more, you will become better at it and you will become more effective. Canvassing is really rewarding, and we know it's a very effective tool. Doing it better and better will help you make such a significant contribution and help us win the election in November. Thanks for watching the video, and here goes. Let's look at these canvassing techniques. To get started, let's go over a few key canvassing concepts. Be yourself, genuine, always courteous, and connecting. Understand how to make the initial contact using a few helpful initial questions. Understand the different types of voters and adapt to who you're talking to. Be in a listening mode. Try to elicit what matters most to the voter. Connect the voter's preferences and concerns to your candidate. For persuaded voters, help them create a plan to get to the polls and vote, and try to enlist them to help by reaching out to others to get to the polls to vote. Get their commitment to go to the polls and to help others. While every voter is obviously unique, we can divide voters into two overarching categories. First, regular voters. Then, low frequency or sporadic voters. For example, they may typically only vote in presidential elections. Within each of these categories, voters will typically range across a preference from Republican to Democratic, or conservative to progressive. Also, there are some voters you can call character voters, who often do not follow politics very much and they don't really see themselves as Democrats or Republicans. They mostly vote on how much affinity or connection they have with an individual candidate or specific qualities they see in a candidate. So now here's a question. Which type of voter is the highest priority for canvassing? It's the low frequency Democratic or low frequency Democratic leaning voter. Okay, now let's look at some examples of canvassing interactions. We have simplified them a bit in the interest of time, but they will give you the main idea. Let's start with the typical way to initiate contact.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Yeah, hi, Ms. Johnson. My name is John Snow. I'm a volunteer with the Democratic Party here in Fairfax County. We're reaching out to voters like you today, people in the neighborhood, to talk to them about the election in November, to find out what folks are thinking about the election. Have you been following the election?
Notice certain key words and phrases in this approach. Volunteer, neighborhood, voters like you, hearing what you're thinking. All of these phrases help establish connection. The question, have you been following the election, is a good way to begin to listen and to understand what kind of voter they are. An alternative approach is to start by saying you are canvassing on behalf of your particular candidate, perhaps say something about him or her, and then move to a listening mode. That's also an okay approach, although it starts out with telling rather than listening. Observe closely the voter's body language. Campaigns will provide you with a script, but they're often awkward and a bit unnatural, so you can adapt the concepts to your own style. So now let's continue on with our approach to our voter, who it turns out is a strong Democrat who always votes.
Hello, Ms. Johnson.
Yes?
Hello, Ms. Johnson. My name is John Snow. I'm a volunteer with the Democratic Party here in Fairfax County, and we're reaching out to voters like you in the neighborhood today to talk to them about the election that's coming up in November. We want to know what voters are thinking, and I'm wondering, have you been following the election?
I have been following the election. I always vote, and I always vote Democratic.
Great. So do you know about our great candidate, Rose Davidson?
I do know about Rose, and I think she's exactly what we need to change the course and the dysfunction in Washington right now.
Great. So that's so good to hear. I'm wondering, though, are there other people that you know that you could reach out to, that you think you might also be able to enlist to vote for Rose?
Great question. You know, my sister lives right down the street. She and her husband, I think, would be very receptive, and there are also some people at my church that I would be willing to talk to and share this literature with.
Wow, that's so great. You know, talking to you, it sounds like you might be a really good volunteer. Do you think you might like to volunteer and do what I'm doing? Or would it also be good if I could put a yard sign in your yard for Rose?
Well, you know, I think I'm kind of overcommitted right now, so I don't think I have time to volunteer, but you sure can put up a yard sign in my lawn. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so you're going to vote for Rose in November. You're going to reach out to your sister and the people in the church, and I'm going to put a yard sign in your yard.
Yep.
Do we have a deal?
We have a deal. Thank
Great.
you for coming by.
Thank you.
Points to remember about strong Democrats who always vote. You don't have to persuade these voters about who to vote for, though you should reinforce their position. Enlist them to reach out to others and help in other ways. Get their commitment to vote and see if they want to volunteer. Now let's look at a regular voter, but one who is an independent or only leans Democratic.
Ms. Andrews, we're interested in hearing your views. Can you tell me, are you aware of the election coming up?
Yes, I've been following it with interest. I consider myself somewhat independent, but I often vote Democratic.
Good, good. And what issues are particularly important to you?
I guess I would say education.
Can you tell me more?
Well, I have 2 children in public schools right now, and I don't think our schools are getting enough support. Also, I am concerned about where we're going to get the money for college for them.
Yeah, I hear you. So, my brothers and sister and I, we all went to public schools, and you know, when I think back about my education, both primary but especially high school, I just remember some fantastic teachers, really exceptional teachers, and I guess I'm worried about being able to attract and retain teachers at that same caliber today.
So am I. I remember good teachers too.
So I wanted to, if I may, share a little information with you about Rose Davidson. So, you know, a couple things I think you'd be interested in knowing about her. One, that education is very much a primary part of her campaign. When her kids were in both primary and secondary school, she was very active in the PTAs of her schools, their schools. And she also testified before the legislature about the need to raise teacher salaries in our state. One of the key issues she's running on is providing tuition-free community college, that is 2 years of college to all the young people in our state. I'm assuming that would be of great interest to you.
That would be so great.
Yeah. Well, so it sounds to me like Rose Davidson might be a very good fit with your interests. Is that your feeling as well? What do you think?
I'll say I'm definitely leaning that way, but I would like to take some time before making up my mind.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But I appreciate you thinking about her. I hope you'll read the literature and go online. There's so much information there. But will you promise me that you will vote?
Yes, definitely.
Thanks. It's such a pleasure to be able to learn about your particular interests. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Here are the key points for the independent or lean Democratic voter. Ask what issues are important to them. Connect on those issues with your own personal story or your own experience. Connect your candidate with the voter's concern. Don't worry if you don't completely convince them with one conversation. Moving them in your candidate's direction is still very worthwhile. Now let's consider a voter who doesn't vote that often, but is sympathetic to voting Democratic.
We're reaching out in the neighborhood today to talk to voters about what they're thinking. Have you been following the election?
Not particularly. I always vote in presidential elections, but I usually honestly don't vote in the midterm elections.
Well, this is your chance to have your voice be heard. Can you tell me what you're thinking about how things are going in Washington with Mr. Trump and the Republican Congress?
Oh, I'm not very happy about what's going on.
Well, if you vote, you have a chance to have an impact. Can you tell me what kind of things are important to you right now?
Well, I'm unhappy about a lot of things, but I would say that my major concern is health care.
Okay, and can you tell me some more about that?
Well, I just feel like everyone should have access to adequate health care.
I agree that's so important. I'm fortunate enough to have Medicare, and I had to have surgery on my shoulder recently, and if I hadn't had Medicare, I'd have a frozen shoulder right now. So, healthcare is obviously pretty important.
Wow, that would have been bad.
So let me also tell you about my candidate, Rose Davidson. Healthcare is really important to her. She's a good Democrat. I know you tend to like to vote for Democrats. And she wants to extend Medicare to people in general so that many more people will have access to health care. She's had a life of public service, and she really wants to go to Washington to solve problems.
That sounds really good, actually.
Okay, so I know you've only tended to vote in presidential elections before, but voters like you are actually really important, because if we had folks like you that actually vote in these midterm elections, we would really win. And let me just give you a few little secrets about that. One is that if you don't vote, in a sense, you're actually voting for the Republicans. But secondly, because people do tend not to vote in these midterm elections, when you do vote, your vote counts more than it would in a presidential election. So with your help, we can really win. So what do you say?
Yeah, I think I need to vote this time. Do you know where I vote?
Yeah, you vote at the library on Church Street, is what it says here.
Okay.
Okay, great. So you're definitely going to vote this time?
I'm going to vote.
All right, so we got a deal?
We do.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
So let's do this thing.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so now I get to tell you the key points for this canvas that we just saw. And really, the low-frequency voter who has affinity for Democrats is the highest priority voter that you will encounter, and so it really pays to spend as much time as you think you need with them. It's good to reinforce their preference, but the key thing is you really want to reinforce the point and motivate them that they should vote. One of the good ways to do that is to raise what's going on in Washington with Mr. Trump and with the Republicans. And of course you want to get commitment, and especially with this particular kind of voter. One way to do that is with a handshake, but another really good one is to do it with what are called commit to vote cards, which are postcards that the campaigns ask the voters to fill out, that remind them to vote, and that the campaign send back to the voter a few days before the actual election.
Now let's consider a character voter.
We're interested to hear what voters are thinking. Have you been following the election?
No, I haven't been following the election. I tend to vote regularly, but I tend to vote for the person rather than a specific party candidate. But what's going on in Washington really has me turned off right now, so I haven't been following it, no.
Fair enough. Then let me tell you about our great candidate, Rose Davidson. As you will see from the literature, she has had a life dedicated to public service. She's a retired Army officer who served our country, and she learned to analyze and solve problems as well as work with people with different perspectives. She grew up here in the district, and she has worked really hard in our community, serving on the board of our local food bank, and she's one of the founders of Mothers United Against Opioid Addiction. She's energetic, she's hardworking, and she will work with anyone to help break the gridlock in Washington.
She sounds pretty well qualified. I place a high value on military experience. I think the military does a great job of training people. And to be honest with you, our family has had some direct personal experience with the opioid addiction problem. If she can get along with people of other persuasions and work across an aisle in Congress, I think that would be very interesting.
So it sounds as if Rose is just who you're looking for. So do you think you'll be with us this year, Mr. Schweitzer?
Well, I think I'm leaning that direction. I'd want to do some of my own research to get a little more information about her, but which I'll do. But yeah, sounds promising.
Fair enough, Mr. Schweitzer. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Please look at the literature and feel free to go online to learn more. And please promise me you will vote.
I promise I'll vote.
Key points about the character voter. Have lots of positives to say about your candidate, especially about public service, roots in the community, their problem-solving ability, and their capacity to work with whomever is needed to get things done. It's often good to ask what is important to the voter and to connect your candidate to their concerns. Don't necessarily expect to persuade these voters completely, but you can often make really good progress. They will remember you if you connect and you're genuine and you're sympathetic. Here's another type of voter you may commonly find.
Hi, Mr. Miller. We're interested to hear what voters are thinking right now. Have you been following the election?
I think you've come to the wrong house. We're all Republicans here.
Okay, well, thank you for your time.
Reminders about solid Republican voters. Stay courteous, but move on quickly. Don't waste your time or theirs. Record the voter as Republican. That is important information for our campaigns to know. A voter who is not a solid Republican and only Republican-leaning will often engage in discussion, and it makes sense to approach them as you would an independent voter. Usually about 2 weeks before the actual election, campaigns will switch strategy to focus primarily on voters they think are highly sympathetic in order to encourage those voters to actually vote, by encouraging them to get out to the polls and helping them to develop a plan to vote.
Hello, Mrs. Cooperman. My name is Victor Rodman. I'm with the Democratic Party here in Harrisburg. We're reaching out to voters to remind them about the election coming up next Tuesday. Are you aware of the election?
I am. I'm planning to vote, and I'm planning to vote Democratic. I really feel like the Democrats are going to help get us back on the right track.
That's great, Mrs. Cooperman. We really need your help, and we really appreciate it. Do you know where you vote?
I believe it's at St. Mary's Church.
Yes, that's right. And do you know what time you would be voting?
I think I'm working that day, so I'll probably vote after work. I get off at around 4.
Yeah, that should be fine. The polls in Pennsylvania open at 7 a.m. and close at 8 p.m., which I'm sure you are already aware of.
Yes.
How will you get to the poll?
Oh, I can just walk. It's really just a couple of blocks.
And do you know anyone else that you might talk to remind them to vote, to make sure we get as much support as possible in this election for our message?
Well, my son and his family live a couple blocks away. I'll talk to them. I often do talk to them, and I'll make sure I do that.
That'd be terrific. So you're going to vote next Tuesday. You're going to walk to the polls after work, and you're going to call your son and his family and encourage them or remind them to vote as well.
Absolutely.
Thanks. We have a deal?
Yep.
Okay.
Key points for GOTV canvassing. Help the voter plan where, when, and how they will get to the polls. Ask them to reach out to enlist others to vote and get their commitment. Now, let's consider a few common questions. Are voters sometimes rude to canvassers? Perhaps surprisingly, almost all of the time, voters are quite courteous. Once in a while, one might be mildly rude, but very rarely actually hostile. Approaching them in a courteous listening mode will help. Here's another question. What if I'm looking for a particular person, a particular voter in the house, and someone else answers the door and the first person is not available? Some campaigns will want you to simply record that the designated person is not home and move on. However, we recommend taking the opportunity to talk to any voter. We find many of the most productive conversations are with other voters, including the ones we encounter on the street.
Hello again. These examples can be a bit simplified just to get the ideas across. Individual voters vary widely, and productive conversations with voters can be a lot longer. But the basic patterns are the same. So let's just review our main points. Be yourself, listen to the voter, try to figure out what kind of voter it is, go to their concerns, use your own stories to connect to the voter and connect the voter to your candidate. Support the importance of voting and get their commitment to vote. A really rewarding part of canvassing is all of the conversations we have with voters. It is so interesting to talk to such a variety of people and hear their thoughts and opinions, even those of Republicans. But the most rewarding part of canvassing comes on election night, when hopefully your candidate will win. And you will feel so good that you contributed significantly to that win and to taking our country back. Thank you so much for watching this video. We really appreciate it. We appreciate your canvassing and all the other contributions you are making.